For over 1,000 years, history insisted that Vikings were a tribe of blonde, blue-eyed Scandinavian warriors. But when scientists sequenced DNA from 442 Viking Age graves, the results rewrote everything. Some honored Vikings had zero Scandinavian ancestry, others had brown hair and even Mediterranean skin tones. The truth was stark. Viking was a job, not a bloodline. So who could really claim the title, and what does this change about everything we thought we knew? Inside a secure laboratory, ancient teeth and fragments of dense ear bones arrive from archaeological sites across Europe. Each specimen is logged, gloved hands moving with practiced caution. The real treasure lies deep within, dental pulp, a protected core that can shield DNA from the ravages of 1,000 years. Petrous bones, the hardest in the human body, offer another window back in time. These samples, drawn from 442 individuals who lived between 750 AD and 1050 AD, are the raw material for a new kind of historical investigation. The process begins with decontamination. Every surface, every tool, every sample is treated to remove traces of modern DNA. Scientists wear full bodysuits and filtered masks to prevent even a stray skin cell from clouding the results. The teeth are sliced open, the pulp carefully extracted. In the next room, bone powder is mixed with chemical solutions to release ancient genetic fragments. Most of these fragments are short, degraded, and mixed with DNA from soil bacteria. Specialized protocols, developed over years of trial and error, help enrich the human material. Next comes the sequencing. Using next-generation machines, researchers read millions of DNA fragments in parallel, assembling them like a massive jigsaw puzzle. The challenge is immense. Ancient DNA is often fragmented and damaged, with chemical changes that can mimic real mutations. To separate genuine Viking genomes from laboratory noise, scientists rely on patterns unique to ancient DNA, such as characteristic damage at the ends of molecules. Statistical models help distinguish authentic signals from contamination or error. Each genome is mapped against reference panels from modern and ancient populations. Over months, the data grows into a library of 442 complete ancient genomes, each tied to a specific burial, a time, and a place. The team uses principal component analysis to visualize how these individuals cluster by ancestry, and kinship coefficients to identify relatives buried side by side. Every step is checked again. Independent labs repeat the sequencing, and negative controls ensure the results are not artifacts of the process. The scale of the study is unprecedented. Never before had so many Viking Age individuals been sequenced in such detail. The result is a genetic time capsule, ready to reveal not just who the Vikings were, but how they were connected, where they came from, and how their world was shaped by movement and mixing. The myth of the Viking as a static, isolated type stands in stark contrast to the complexity now emerging from the data. The groundwork is set for a new understanding, built not on legend, but on the evidence locked inside ancient bones. In a windswept cemetery on the Orkney Islands, archaeologists uncovered a grave that seemed to fit every expectation of a Viking burial. The woman inside rested among ornate brooches, beads, and a sword, objects unmistakably Norse in style and value. Yet when her DNA was sequenced, the result startled even the most seasoned researchers. Her genetic profile matched not Scandinavia, but the British Isles. She was, by all markers, Pictish, a local woman given a Viking burial surrounded by foreign treasures. Her story, written in both grave goods and genome, upended the idea that only Scandinavians could be Vikings. Here was proof that identity could be chosen, or perhaps earned, by adopting the customs and status symbols of a new world. Similar surprises surfaced far from Orkney, on the shores of the Baltic Sea. At several Polish and Estonian sites, warriors interred with swords and shields, hallmarks of the Viking raider, carried genetic signatures from Slavic populations, not from the north. In the boat burials at Salma, Estonia, a group of 41 men were laid to rest with weapons, gaming pieces, and animal remains. Some of these men were genetically linked to Sweden, but others showed ancestry from the eastern Baltic. The grave itself, a ship pulled ashore and filled with the dead, followed Norse tradition down to the last detail, yet the people inside were not all Scandinavian by birth. At a burial mound in Poland, a man was found with a distinctive Scandinavian-style axe and ornate jewelry. His DNA, however, pointed to local Slavic roots. He had been buried as a Viking, with all the trappings of a foreign warrior, but his ancestry told a different story. Such cases were not isolated. Across the Viking world, individuals of diverse backgrounds received the same rights, the same honors, and the same cultural markers as their Scandinavian peers. The evidence from these graves is clear. Viking identity was not dictated by bloodline, but by the adoption of language, customs, and the tools of the trade. Whether through alliance, trade, or conquest, people from the British Isles, the Baltic, and beyond could become Vikings. The grave goods and burial rituals were statements of belonging, not of origin. This new understanding, visible in the clash between genetics and grave goods, reshapes the story of the Viking Age. The boundaries were porous, and the path to becoming Viking was open to many who chose, or were chosen, to walk it. Far from the familiar image of tall, fair-haired warriors, ancient DNA reveals a different story written in the very code of the Viking world. When scientists examined the genetic sequences tied to hair and skin color, their results upended centuries of assumption. Brown hair was not an exception, but the rule, with dark shades outnumbering blondes in Viking Age Scandinavia. Black hair also appeared in the genomes, carried through alleles inherited from parents and grandparents, whose own origins often stretched south and east of the Nordic homeland. The genetic markers for pigmentation, SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 among them, tell a story of ongoing change. These variants that lighten skin and hair were present but not yet dominant. Many individuals carried ancestral forms linked to darker complexions more common in southern Europe and the Mediterranean. The DNA points to olive and tan skin, a far cry from the pale faces shown in later medieval art and in modern film. Even eye color was more varied than legend suggests. Blue eyes existed, but so did hazel and brown, scattered across the population like pebbles on a beach. This diversity did not arise overnight. It was the product of centuries of movement and mixing. As trade, marriage, and migration brought new genes into the north, the study found individuals in Denmark with ancestry pointing as far as the Middle East, their pigmentation genes reflecting a blend of distant origins. In some graves, dark hair, darker skin, and non-local ancestry stood side by side with the most iconic symbols of Norse culture, swords, brooches, and ship burials. The evidence from the genomes is clear and consistent. The Vikings were not uniform, they were not a single tribe of blonde giants. The alleles that shaped their appearance were as mixed as the routes they traveled. The genetic palette of the Viking Age was broad, painted with shades from across Europe and beyond. The myth of the uniformly fair Scandinavian falls away, replaced by a population whose looks reflected a world in motion. The faces of the Viking Age were as varied as the lands they visited, and their DNA carries the record of every journey. Trade and migration shaped the genetic landscape of Viking Age Scandinavia long before the first longships appeared on foreign shores. Ancient DNA traces a steady flow of genes into the north from southern Europe, the Baltic, and even further east, carried by merchants, captives, and travelers moving along the arteries of rivers and sea routes. The genetic signatures of these newcomers are still visible in the genomes of Viking-era burials, revealing a population already mixed before the age of raids and settlements began. Major waterways. Like the Volga, Dnieper, and Oder, connected Scandinavia to the heart of the continent. Along these corridors, goods and people traveled together, amber furs and slaves from the north, and silver, silk, and spices from the south and east. Archaeological finds confirm the reach of these networks. Arabic coins and Swedish graves, Byzantine jewelry in Danish settlements, and even traces of Middle Eastern ancestry in a Danish burial. The movement of genes mirrored the movement of trade, creating a patchwork of ancestries across the region. Within Scandinavia itself, the genetic study revealed distinct clusters tied to geography. Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes each formed their own genetic groups, shaped by the mountains, seas, and forests that both connected and divided their homelands. Yet even within these clusters, signs of admixture appear, evidence that isolation was never complete, and that new genes arrived with every generation. When Viking ships set sail, these regional differences shaped the routes of expansion. Norwegian Vikings looked west, crossing the North Sea to the British Isles, Ireland, Iceland, and Greenland. Their genetic imprint remains strongest in places like Orkney and the Scottish Isles. Danish Vikings turned south and west, focusing their energy on England, where their descendants can still be identified in the DNA of Eastern English populations. Swedish Vikings took a different path, steering their ships east along the rivers of what is now Russia and Ukraine, reaching as far as the Black Sea and the markets of Byzantium. The genetic data confirms these directional patterns. Each region's Vikings left behind a trail of genetic evidence, mapping their journeys across Europe and beyond. The diversity found in Viking graves is not an accident. It is the legacy of centuries of movement, exchange, and adaptation, written into the very fabric of their descendants. These roots of genes and ships set the stage for the human stories of kinship and connection that followed in the wake of the Viking Age. On the Estonian island of Saaremaa, archaeologists uncovered a scene frozen in violence and loss. 2 Viking ships drawn up on the shore, 41 men laid out in the hulls, their bodies marked by sword cuts and arrow wounds. Among them, genetic analysis revealed 4 brothers, all from the same small community in Sweden, killed side by side far from home. Their DNA matches were unmistakable. Siblings in life and in death, there remains a testament to the family bonds that shaped Viking raiding parties. The kinship did not end there. Several others in the grave shared second-degree relationships, cousins, half-brothers, perhaps childhood friends. The Salme burial is more than a battlefield aftermath. It is a story of families who risked everything together, who sailed into danger not as strangers but as kin. The trauma on their bones, deep cuts to arms and skulls, defensive wounds along forearms, speaks to a desperate fight, a final stand made as a unit. The emotional weight of the Salme brothers' fate stands in sharp contrast to another surprise unearthed in Sweden. In a grave at Birka, once assumed to contain a male warrior, DNA sequencing revealed a woman. She had been buried with a full set of weapons, sword, axe, arrows, and 2 horses, all markers of a high-status fighter. Her bones showed signs of physical strength, with muscle attachments hinting at years of training. For over a century, her identity had been misread. Her story hid beneath assumptions about who could wield power in the Viking world. The evidence is now clear. Women, too, could claim a warrior's place, traveling and fighting across the Viking world, honored with the same rights as their male counterparts. Taken together, these discoveries overturn the old image of the Viking Age as a brotherhood of blonde, male raiders. The truth is more human and more complex, families setting out together, women rising to prominence, and bonds of blood and choice carrying people across seas and into legend. The Viking world was not closed or uniform. It was a society where courage and loyalty, not ancestry or gender alone, shaped who could be called a Viking. Across the United Kingdom, traces of Viking ancestry linger in the DNA of millions. Roughly 6% of people living in Britain today carry identifiable genetic markers from Scandinavia, a legacy of the Viking Age that reaches its highest levels in places once ruled by Norse settlers, Yorkshire, Orkney, and the Scottish Islands. These haplotypes, passed quietly from parent to child over 1,000 years, tell a story of movement and mixing that shape not just the past, but the present as well. The genetic evidence does not fade at the edge of the British Isles. In Iceland, the imprint of Norwegian Vikings is unmistakable. Nearly 3/4 of modern Icelanders carry the same genetic signatures found in Viking burials from western Norway, a reflection of the founding population that crossed the North Atlantic in the late 9th century. Even today, rare Scandinavian alleles detected in ancient remains persist in rural Icelandic communities, echoing the journeys of settlers who braved the open sea. The fate of the Viking colony in Greenland has long puzzled historians. Some imagined the Norse settlers vanished into the Arctic, lost to disease, climate, or conflict with indigenous Inuit groups. Ancient DNA offers a different answer. Genomes from Greenland's abandoned farmsteads match those of late medieval Icelanders, not modern Greenlanders. The genetic trail shows that as the climate cooled and trade faltered, most Norse colonists did not disappear. They sailed back across the Atlantic, carrying their ancestry home to Iceland and Norway. Their genetic signatures, once rooted in Greenland's soil, now survive in the DNA of their North Atlantic descendants. The reach of the Vikings stretches even further. In Poland, the Baltic states, and parts of southern Italy, small but measurable traces of Scandinavian ancestry have been detected, remnants of centuries-old migrations and settlements. The evidence is clear. The Viking Age was not a closed chapter, but a force that continues to shape the identities of people across Europe. Modern populations inherit not just legends, but the living record of ancient journeys written in their genes. Viking DNA proves identity is never as simple as a bloodline or a myth. Today, our own societies face questions about who belongs and how cultures form. Science shows belonging is built, not inherited. As we redraw the lines of history, we are reminded the stories we tell about the past shape who we invite into the future. What do you think truly defines identity? Share your thoughts below.